So over the last month, I quizzed 113,000 people on a muscle and fitness IQ test that consists of 30 multiple choice questions about building muscle, gaining strength, and losing fat. In this video, we're going to be breaking down how well my audience did and what the correct answers were. For example, I was pleasantly surprised to see that over 98% of people correctly selected a caloric deficit as the most important factor for losing fat, but I was a bit surprised that only 49% of people selected the anterior or front delts as the least active muscle on a cable row, and only 16% of people got the refeed question right. But I do think that overall, you guys did pretty well. The average score was 61%, so about 18 out of 30 questions right, and over 87,000 people passed the test, which I think is pretty solid because the test was pretty hard. I mean, only 158 people scored 100%, so just about 1 in every 1,000 people got a perfect score. And this is what the results curve looked like, so pretty much a perfectly normal distribution with the majority of scores clustering around that 60 to 70% zone. And if you'd like to go ahead and take the test for yourself, you can still do so over at jeffnippard.com/muscle-IQ. I broke the test up into 3 levels, easy, medium, and hard, with 10 questions each. So let's get started with the easy level first. All right, what is the most important factor for losing fat? 98% of people said a caloric deficit, and the correct answer is a caloric deficit. Of course, these other factors can play some role in determining how much of a deficit you end up in, but overall, the first law of thermodynamics says that even if your diet is super high in carbohydrate or super skewed toward one time of day versus another, you will still lose fat as long as you're in a net caloric deficit over time, making it the most important factor for fat loss. Okay, next question. Do you need to train to failure to stimulate hypertrophy? 90% of people said no, and the correct answer is no. You don't need to train to failure to stimulate hypertrophy. Now, some people who said yes might have been thinking that you need to train to failure to maximize hypertrophy, which would be more open to debate, but there's no question that we can stimulate muscle growth by training pretty far from failure. I personally do still think that both failure and non-failure training have their place, but no, you don't need to train to failure to build some muscle. Okay, is it possible to build muscle and lose fat at the same time? 96% say yes, and the correct answer is yes. We see body recomposition all the time in the scientific research. In fact, if you look at the individual data from pretty much any random training study, you'll most likely see a bunch of subjects that gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Granted, I still think doing separate bulking and cutting phases makes sense for some people. I'm actually nearing the end of a bulk myself, but that doesn't mean that recomp isn't a perfectly attainable goal for a lot of lifters. All right, so the next question is, who would have the hardest time achieving body recomposition? 86% of people said a lean, advanced trainee, and that's the correct answer. The more advanced you are, the harder it is for your body to build muscle at all, especially as you get close to your genetic ceiling. And so, at a certain point of advancement, a caloric surplus becomes the most practical way to push that ceiling up, which then makes simultaneous fat loss, or recomp, less feasible. Whereas for the other options here, recomp is much easier to achieve. And I've explained why in another video that I can link down below. Okay, which of the following supplements has the most scientific support for muscle and strength gain? 87% of people said creatine monohydrate, and the correct answer is creatine monohydrate. The second most common response was BCAAs, selected by just over 6,000 people. But this 2019 study concluded that BCAA supplementation alone doesn't enhance muscle protein synthesis any more than consumption of complete, high-quality protein. And I personally don't recommend them, especially if protein intake is sufficient. All right, what is the most practically efficient rep range for building muscle? 92% of people said 6 to 15 reps, and the correct answer is 6 to 15 reps. Now, it is true that all of these rep ranges will build muscle, and no, there isn't one single hypertrophy rep zone. However, the question asked what is the most practically efficient rep range for building muscle, and that's definitely 6 to 15 reps. If you do too much heavy 1 to 6 rep stuff, you'll need to do more sets to accumulate enough volume, which is less time efficient, and if you do too many high rep sets, you can impair your ability to recover, meaning more rest time in between sessions. So 6 to 15 is the most practical middle ground. However, including some sets in the other rep zones is still a good idea for stimulating slightly different adaptations. Okay, which muscle is not significantly activated by the exercise shown below? Anterior deltoid was the most common response, which is the correct answer. However, this question definitely tripped a lot of people up. Tens of thousands of people picked either the lats, traps, or biceps as non-active muscles here. So let's clear this up. The lats will definitely be highly active because you're extending the shoulder or bringing your arm down, and this is the case for pretty much any pulling exercise you do. I think some people picked the traps because they were thinking of the upper traps, but the traps actually fan out and run all the way down the mid-back, so anytime you're doing a row, your mid-traps will be active because they squeeze the shoulder blades together. In fact, even if you modified the row to make it more lat dominant by really just driving your elbows down and trying not to squeeze your shoulder blades together, your traps would still be very active because they'd be playing a major stabilizing role. And even though the biceps won't be quite as active as they would be on a bicep curl, you're still flexing or bending your elbow, so they're going to be contributing to some extent. What won't be contributing are the anterior or front delts. They'll be active on pushing exercises like presses, flies, and front raises, and the back muscles in the biceps will be active on vertical and horizontal pulls like this one. Okay, which of the following describes the important eccentric phase on a bicep curl? 77% of you said when you lower the weight back down, and that's the correct answer. The eccentric, or negative, is when the muscle is lengthening, and there is research showing that having some control on that eccentric phase is very important for muscle growth. All right, which of the following factors contributes the most to muscle growth? People seem to be pretty torn between mechanical tension and muscle damage, but the correct answer is in fact mechanical tension. Muscle damage and metabolic stress may play some secondary role, but there's scientific consensus that tension is what drives hypertrophy. I discussed these factors in a lot of detail in my 5 levels video from a couple months ago, if you want to check that out. Okay, last question on the easy level. What does RPE stand for? Most people said rating of perceived exertion, and the correct answer is rating of perceived exertion. So RPE is your rating of what you perceived your exertion to be. Now these days, most bodybuilding and strength coaches set this up on a reps in reserve scale, where RPE 10 means you hit failure or had 0 reps in reserve, RPE 9 means you had 1 rep in reserve, and so on down the line. All right, let's move on to the medium level. Which rest period length tends to be better for hypertrophy? This one was split pretty evenly down the middle, with 46% saying shorter rest periods and 53% saying longer rest periods. But the correct answer is longer rest periods. This 2017 systematic review by Gergich and colleagues found that resting longer than 60 seconds was better than resting shorter than 60 seconds, and that was likely because the longer rest periods led to higher training volumes. Okay, which of the following would not count as a form of progressive overload? So progressive overload is when you gradually increase the amount of stress you're placing on a muscle over time. The most common way to do this is by gradually adding volume. So that can be either adding some weight, adding a rep, or adding a set from workout to workout. So just looking at the options here, option C, increasing exercise variation, would not count as progressive overload because when you're switching up exercises, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to be gradually increasing stress on the target muscle. This is why I recommend having at least a few core exercises that stay in your routine week to week that you aim to get progressively stronger on over time. And I was happy to see that 88% of people got that one right. Okay, so complete the sentence. Muscle soreness, blank. Muscle soreness can be a useful proxy that you hit the target muscle. Yes, that's true. For example, if you do hip thrusts and your lower back is super sore, but your glutes aren't sore at all, that's an indication that you might want to modify your technique next time to get your glutes more involved. Muscle soreness is very important for muscle growth. That's not true. For example, running a marathon will get you very sore, but won't build much muscle at all. Muscle soreness shouldn't happen when training with good form. That's not true either. Muscle soreness is normal, especially when doing something new, regardless of whether the technique is good or bad. So A is the correct answer here, and I was happy to see that 78% of people got that one right. All right, Noelle is a late beginner to early intermediate level lifter who wants to build full body strength and size with an emphasis on glute development. Assuming she does multiple exercises for multiple sets for her glutes each workout, how many days per week should she train her glutes to maximize gains without seriously risking recovery issues? Okay, so 96% of people said 2 to 3 times per week, and I do think that's the right answer. You could argue that once a week might be enough as long as she's doing enough volume, and that could be true. However, I think 2 to 3 times a week would be more optimal because she'll be most likely getting in higher quality volumes by spreading it out more. And then I think she could risk recovery issues hitting multiple exercises for multiple sets 5 to 7 days a week. That'd be a lot of volume, so I would say B is the best answer here. Next question, which RIR range is most likely to optimize hypertrophy? The responses here were kind of all over the place, and I'm assuming that's because many people just weren't sure what RIR stood for. So RIR stands for reps in reserve. So basically, how many reps should you leave in the tank to maximize muscle growth? So 44% of people said 0 to 3 reps in reserve, which is the correct answer, and I'm assuming the 29,000 people who picked 6 to 12 probably thought RIR meant something to do with rep range, so I was a bit sneaky to put that in there, but 0 to 3 reps in reserve is the right answer. All right, for an average lifter using standard technique, which of the following muscles is least activated by the barbell back squat? 75% said the hamstrings, and the correct answer is The hamstrings. There are 2 separate EMG studies showing low hamstrings activation on the squat, and if you just think about it biomechanically, 3 out of the 4 heads of the hamstrings cross both the hip joint and the knee joint, meaning that they'll be lengthening at the knee while shortening at the hip. So the total muscle length actually doesn't change much throughout the range of motion. On the other hand, the quads get absolutely hammered as you extend the knee, and the glutes will be the main muscle extending the hips as you stand back up. Next question. Billy is an intermediate lifter who's been weight training for almost 4 years. He really wants to grow his chest. Assuming he's taking most sets close to failure, how many sets per week should he do to give him the best muscular gains without seriously risking recovery issues? So 64% of people said 14 sets per week, and 28% said 24 sets per week. Now, this is another coaching question that could be open to some interpretation. However, I do think 14 sets per week is the best answer, especially given the recovery clause. I think the further you push above 20 sets per week or so, the more you risk potential recovery issues, especially when most sets are close to failure. Also, James Krieger did a meta-analysis on the current volume literature, and he suggested 12 to 16 weekly sets per muscle group as a practical range for most people. Obviously, this will vary by muscle a bit. All right, which is the most appropriate protein recommendation for an average lifter in a caloric surplus whose primary goal is to gain muscle? Well, 69% of people said 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, or 0.7 to 1 gram per pound, and that's the correct answer. For muscle gain in a surplus, 1 gram per pound is about the upper end of what you'll find recommended in the best science, even though I do think a case can be made for slightly higher intakes in more advanced lifters who are either in a deficit or seeking body recomposition. In this case, B is the best answer. Okay, which exercise is shown in the image below? 55% of people said Meadows row, and the correct answer is Meadows row, named after John Meadows, who was a great mentor to so many people in the bodybuilding world, myself included. And you can see him demonstrating the exercise here, where you grab the end of a barbell, brace against your leg with your non-working arm, and drive your elbow out to really hit the mid-traps, rhomboids, and rear delts. Okay, last question for the medium level. What joint action is shown below? 47% of you said shoulder abduction, and the correct answer is shoulder abduction. So you can think of lifting your arm out to the side like your arm being abducted by aliens, and the same thing goes for hip abductions, which is when aliens are abducting your legs out. And that's how I remember it anyway. All right, let's move on to the hard level. Okay, you're programmed to do a max effort set of 4 to 6 reps on the deadlift. If you put on a lifting belt and use it properly, which of the following is least likely to occur? A, you lift more weight. Yep, that's likely to occur. Most people can lift around 5 to 10% more weight with a belt. B, you lift the weight faster with more explosive force. Yep, several studies show that people can move weight faster with a belt than without one. C, you significantly decrease core activity. A lot of people think that belts make your core weaker, but this one actually isn't true. There are a number of studies showing that wearing a belt doesn't decrease core activity. So C is not true. And then D, you significantly increase IAP, which stands for intra-abdominal pressure. That is true. Basically, you create this rigid column of air in your torso when you push out against your belt. So the correct answer is C, and it looks like 43% of you got that one right. All right, a strength standards question here. So Michael weighs 80 kilos or 176 pounds and has been training seriously for almost 5 years. He bench presses twice per week with good technique and uses structured progressions to increase his strength over time. Assuming he has average genetics for strength and is dedicated to the gym, how much should he realistically be able to bench press for a 1-rep max? And for choices, we've got 80 kilos, 100 kilos, 125 kilos, and 165 kilos. So 66% of you said 125 kilos or 275 pounds, and I do think that's the right answer. If you've been training seriously for 5 years, you should be in the intermediate to advanced category. And according to the strength standards from my last video, that should put you between a 1.5 to 2 times body weight bench press, which would be 120 kilos or 265 pounds to 160 kilos or about 350 pounds for an 80 kilo or 176 pound lifter. Of course, I think B, or 100 kilos or 220 pounds, is also realistic, but I don't think it's the best answer. That would only be a 1.25 times body weight bench, and for the example lifter given, I do think that would be selling himself short. And then 165 kilos or 363 pounds is also certainly possible, but that'd be over a 2 times body weight bench. And that's usually only realistic at the 5-year mark with some pretty good genetics. So C is the best answer here, and I was happy to see that 66% of you got that one right. All right, this was a tricky one. Internal cueing would be most appropriate for which exercise from a hypertrophy standpoint? Well, 42% of you said easy bar bicep curl, 33% said barbell back squat, and 18% said barbell bench press, and 6% said incline treadmill. Over 5,000 people, incline treadmill. So internal cueing is when you shift your focus inside your body, whereas external cueing is when you think about what your whole body is doing in 3 dimensions. So an example of internal cueing would be thinking about flexing your quads as you squat, whereas external cueing would be thinking about driving through the middle of your foot while lifting your chest up. And based on a big body of research, internal cueing does seem to impair performance, including strength performance. You lift more weight when you focus your attention externally on the lift itself rather than internally on squeezing certain muscles. So for this reason, on heavy compound movements like the barbell back squat and bench press, I generally advise against internal cueing, even from a hypertrophy standpoint, because you'll be limiting tension by limiting the total load that you can use. So I side with the most popular response here, which is the easy bar bicep curl. To support this, there's also this 2017 study from Schoenfeld and colleagues, which found that internal cueing, by telling subjects to squeeze the muscle, led to greater increases in biceps thickness than external cueing by telling subjects to just get the weight up. Now, if you still think A or C is the best answer, I'd love to hear your rationale in the comments, as I do think there is a case that can be made there. All right, what is the average fiber type composition of the soleus muscle of the calves? So the soleus muscle is one of the 2 muscles that make up the triceps surae, the muscle group that we simply call the calves, with the other being the gastrocnemius, or gastroc for short. And it looks like 34% of you chose B, thinking the soleus is slightly type 2, or fast twitch dominant. However, the correct answer is C. Soleus is actually very type 1, or slow twitch dominant, probably because of its function in long duration, low intensity tasks like walking and standing. So I think you could argue that the soleus is better targeted through higher rep training. However, the research is a bit mixed on that, so I'd suggest still using a variety of different rep ranges for optimal calf development. Okay, which of the following activities has been shown to acutely reduce muscle protein synthesis? About 50% of you said a high sugar meal, 23% said cold water immersion, 22% stretching in between sets, and 4% foam rolling. And the correct answer is cold water immersion. This 2019 study showed that cold water immersion lowered myofibrillar muscle protein synthesis, and this other study from the same year showed that cold water immersion led to significantly blunted muscle hypertrophy across a 7-week training study. So if your goal is to maximize muscle gain, cold baths are probably not the best idea. As for the other choices, they were just red herrings. There's actually some research showing that stretching in between sets could be beneficial for growth. I did a whole other video on that I can link down below. And I'm not surprised that most people selected a high sugar meal because sugar seems to take the hit for pretty much everything negative these days, but there's no research I'm aware of suggesting it does anything good or bad for muscle protein synthesis. All right, Rachel is an advanced level lifter who's been training for both strength and size for almost 10 years. On an AMRAP set, so as many reps as possible, roughly how many reps would you expect her to hit with 80% of her daily 1-rep max on the squat? 43% of you said 7 to 10 reps, and 42% of you said 4 to 6 reps. And the correct answer is 7 to 10 reps. There is some individual variability with this, but on average, most people should get around 8 reps with 80% of their 1-rep max. If you only get 4 to 6 reps, you've most likely overestimated your max for the day. Maybe you're weaker than you think. And if you get 12 to 15 reps or higher, your max is probably higher than you think. Just consider this chart from Reactive Training Systems, where if we look at the RPE 10 row, because it was an AMRAP set, and go over to around 80%, you'll see that would correspond to about 7 to 8 reps on average. I don't love these tables because new research shows that rep maxes at any given percent 1RM do vary quite a lot from person to person, but they're still good for giving you some ballpark idea of what to expect. Next question, which component of metabolism refers to activities like bringing in the groceries and is a major factor in metabolic adaptation to weight loss? So 54% of you said NEAT, and the correct answer is NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is simply the number of calories you burn from all your daily activities other than formal exercise. And as you get leaner, your body starts subconsciously reducing this component of metabolism by moving around less. You'll park a little closer to the grocery store, fidget less at your desk, drag your feet a bit more without even realizing it. So this is something to be aware of and can probably be offset to some extent by ensuring you meet a daily step count goal or just making a little extra effort to move around a bit more as you get deeper into your cut. All right, what type of periodization is shown in the table below? This one definitely tripped a lot of people up, and the most common response was block periodization, But the correct answer is actually daily undulating periodization, or DUP. So DUP is when the rep range varies or undulates within a single week. So you can see that here in week 1, we're on the first chest, shoulders, and triceps day, we're doing 8 to 10 reps. And then on the second chest, shoulders, and triceps day, we're doing 4 to 6 reps. So we've got this undulating pattern of reps on a daily basis, hence daily undulating periodization. It can't be block periodization because each block typically lasts 4 to 8 weeks at least, so there's not enough info here to know. And it can't be linear or reverse linear because each week the rep count stays the same. If it was linear periodization, the reps would decrease from week to week, and if it was reverse linear, the reps would increase from week to week. So C is the correct answer. Okay, second last question. A 2020 paper from Campbell and colleagues has been called the first bodybuilding refeed study. In this study, one group dieted continuously, and another group used 48-hour refeeds over a 7-week dieting period. Which of the following was a finding in the refeed group? All right, well, 66% of people said D, all of the above, but the correct answer is B, better dry lean mass retention. So this study showed no fat loss difference between a group doing refeeds and a group doing continuous dieting. However, there was better lean mass retention in the group doing refeeds. So rather than think of refeeds as some kind of special fat loss tool, we should instead think of them as a strategy to potentially prevent muscle loss and improve diet adherence. All right, last question. Which of the following would cause muscle protein synthesis to be elevated for the longest period of time? Well, I was happy to see that 72% of people said 1 hour of weight training, which was the correct answer. This figure from Dr. Stu Phillips' 2014 review shows that protein feedings give these short-lived spikes, whereas resistance exercise gives a much more prolonged muscle protein synthetic response. So yes, training does have an overall bigger impact on muscle growth than additional protein does, although increasing protein intake definitely augments the effects of weight training up to a certain point. And that's a wrap for the Muscle IQ test. If you guys want to send it to any of your friends or take it again for yourself, I'll be keeping it live over at jeffnippard.com/muscleiq. And if you enjoyed this type of video, please let me know. I'd be happy to make another test like this, and we can go over the results again in another video. Don't forget to leave me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys all here in the next one.